overtime. When are they starting? It's overtime. 2 minutes after 2 for overtime. It's kind of an 80s feeling. Overtime. I'm overtime. Hey everyone,
that's a good one. Good
Disorganized play. That was almost like a little Hall & Oates-ish.
A little.
I like to think.
Yeah.
Which one of us is Hall and which one of us is
That's
Oates?
for chat to decide.
No, do not give that power to our friends. Hey everyone, welcome to Disorganized Play. I am your host, co-host, and it's Tom. Tom for it's over. I'm over Tom. If I had a dime for every time I heard that phrase pass in front of my ear. I'm Tom Lommel. I am your co-host and dungeon master. Over to my right, your left, is Mr. Dom Zook, fresh off of his brutal tour in the wilds of Indianapolis.
The Midwest, East Coast.
the mid-coast?
Mid-coast.
The mid-coast, yes indeed.
Mid-East.
I am fresh off a tour of my wife's birthday, which was
Happy birthday.
equally exciting and exhausting. we went to JPL and did a tour of the rocket robot place, which was very cool. And then literally it was change clothes and go to the Magic Castle, which we were there later than I wanted to. later than these tired old bones will take us. So that's all good. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Every Wednesday, for the most part, I run a game of Dungeons & Dragons. Every Tuesday I sit down and talk about DMing issues, specifically generally DMing issues that are facing me as I get ready for this week's events. And so we have this show called Disorganized Play where we share a little bit of advice, a little bit of philosophy, a lot of bad singing, and occasionally we share some of our treasures of Gen Con.
Which we'll do now, right?
Yeah, well, we can talk. We don't have to talk about what's on the. You're all capable of reading this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
We'll get into what those things
Okay.
mean. So cool.
All right.
So yeah, I did not go to Gen Con. I thought, well, let's check in and talk to Dom about.
I also didn't. I was not there.
What happened?
I did not go. All the pictures you saw was me in Vegas.
That's right. That's right. You were just there, just like, oh, we gotta make rent. Gotta
do this.
Gotta pay those vet bills. Yeah. Put it all on red. Put it all on red. I'm all in. Spin that thing.
We lost it all.
No.
Yeah. Hey, everyone, and all you folks who got to come and visit with us as we were at Gen Con, Castles and Chemo, Modern Chow, Savage Scott. I saw you guys there. Other folks, there were lots of people there that came and said hi and picked up some campaign coins from us with pictures. So
did the selfie?
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Was that the secret selfie? Was you get a campaign coin if you do a selfie with it?
Well. Nope, not happening.
If you look on Twitter, I did one. So you just keep flooding the chat. Tom deserves coins. Tom deserves coins.
Hey, how's it going, campaign coins?
Well, hello, Mark.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of campaign coins, we're going to have Mark Morrison right here in this very spot. Saturday night. This Saturday night at 8 o'clock. I will be playing in his Call of Cthulhu game. Amy will be playing in his Call of Cthulhu game. We're hoping to have some other guests join us as well. So we normally do not do a Saturday night stream, but Mark is slowly loping his way back across the continent before he begins the perilous overseas swim, which he no doubt will be undertaking to return to his beloved home of Australia.
Yes.
So it's the cheaper way to go. Just swim the Pacific. That garbage gimbal.
Just latch onto that.
Yeah, look out for the plastic. That will get you. So, Simeth Pirnikov, thank you, very good. I appreciate your reroll.
Yes, it's a Reign of Terror. That story arc in Call of Cthulhu. So it's 18th century French Revolution stuff. So
I'll have to put on a bad accent.
Only if everyone else does.
Who knew? Who knew? Tom, an opportunity to put on a bad accent. Amy, an opportunity to do a bad accent.
I'm so sorry, Mark.
I'm going to do whatever Amy's accent is.
Okay.
Only worse.
Right.
Yeah, that's my promise to you. That's Saturday night at 8 o'clock. Tune in. I'm very excited about it.
Tune in. Anyway, Gen Con was great. I got to see Mark as well. Yeah, I mean, so many things are happening. Lots of talk. Lots of fun stuff.
Lots of cool meetings that you can't talk about.
Lots of cool meetings that I cannot talk about.
Some of which might pan out, and who knows? But that's cool.
We'll see. Keep your eyes tuned.
But so for you, it was more of a business con this year than it was kind of go hang out, game, meet fans,
right? So
do a lot of shopping.
Yeah, I was sort of separated from a lot of folks, so I didn't get to hang out. And Kaneas, thank you very much. I met Kaneas at Gen Con as well. Thank you so much for subbing up. Let us know who you want to send that reroll to. Uno, the role-playing game, is coming out. Yep, you got it. First I thought that was Udo, the role-playing game.
Oh yes, Udo Meinhardt, the role-playing game.
Yeah.
There's only one way to play that game.
Yep. No more of that.
That's as far as that's gonna go for now. I'm saving it. I'm saving the magic for Saturday night. Mark.
What else though? I don't know. There was lots of cool things. We let's see.
I sort of observed afar from Twitter, right? Mm-hmm. But you know, it's interesting because it doesn't seem like Gen Con is a super big Twitter experience, or it doesn't seem that way this year. Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, for me, I was reroll to Vanna on Iron Keep tomorrow. All right, make a note. There was for me, I was out and like meeting with people like almost all the time. So me getting on Twitter, I mean, my Twitter I think was pretty much dead the entire time. I didn't do anything, but you know, there was lots of stuff. One of the things that Stephen and I did, Stephen, the storyteller for Uncanny Valley,
Stephen Pope,
which is on the iTunes and the Google Plays. It's a podcast form and a brand new podcast series. Just started. Uncanny Valley Cancer Cell is available now, so go subscribe, rate, review. It's pretty cool. It's really awesome. And Buckle is the storyteller in that, and Stephen is a player in it. So go check that out. But the Thursday night, Stephen and I tried to go play a game of Cthulhu, and it was 10 o'clock at night, and we thought, well, maybe we can drop in and play a game. And well, a lot of people apparently had the same idea. And although all those games were wide open on the event planner, they all filled up super fast. And we got to one where there were 3 of us and only 2, there was 1 spot left and 3 people waiting. And so rather than break up our party, Stephen and I allowed the other guy to play, and we went to go see Teen Titans Go. So to the movies.
You know, in the future, let me just recommend this. Because I've played it at other cons, but Games on Demand is a terrific way to go play a pickup game, and specifically to play a pickup game of something that you may not have played before, right?
Sure, yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong, this is a Dungeons & Dragons show, largely, and I run a Dungeons & Dragons game, but, like, if you want to try that weird one-shot, or, hey, I've heard of this, you know, I always recommend going to the con and playing something that you can't play at home, regardless of what that is. Maybe that's a tournament. Maybe it's some sort of, you know, weird D&D meat grinder tournament. Like we send 16 people in or 8 people in, and then as they die, more people funnel in, or whatever it is. Or you want to play some weird kind of indie story game that you've never heard of, you know, or that you've heard interesting things about, whether that's Blades in the Dark or whatever. And you don't know anyone who can GM it, or you don't want to learn how to learn it or whatever. Dread is a fantastic option, whatnot. Games on Demand has that stuff, and I really recommend, like, go and play with somebody who, and it's fun because a GM says, I'm conversant in these 2 games, and then they put out, like, you can either play the Veil cyberpunk system, or we'll play Fiasco.
Yeah.
And then whoever shows up votes, right? Like, they sign up, and then whichever one fills up first, that's what you're playing.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting way to play. But yeah, for pickup games, I think Games on Demand is terrific.
For sure.
That's me.
So anyway, that was part of all of that. Yeah. Anyway, so that's fun. So there's lots of things. I don't know. Walked the floor many times. David Crinnan was slinging some dungeon in a box, which was fun to go check that out.
Very good.
A lot of people that we've gamed with here. Rodney Thompson with Scratchpad Publishing, who does Dusk City Outlaws, was there with his game, and
you pointed at it. They can't.
I know, but it's right there.
You know it's there. You've watched our show.
Yeah.
Yes, we did that. Dom was nice and picked me up a copy of the softcover Pathfinder playtest.
Yeah.
Because I was curious. It got dinged up.
Let me see.
I'm gonna have to
I have another.
Mark you down for. Okay. All right. We can trade it out. It is very it looks like it literally got dropped like.
Yeah.
This. Honk. That's all good. I'm curious about what's going on with the new Pathfinder. I'm interested to see. And I have a friend who's played a lot of Pathfinder, and he's getting a copy too. So he may want to either run a one-shot or whatever. So I was like, why not? Why not take a look?
I mean, we're not going to get into a review of the playtest.
No, I literally just picked up the book 10 minutes ago.
No, but I did thumb through it on the flight back home, and there's some cool bits in here.
You didn't just thumb through it. You just like.
Yeah, and then I slammed it, and I'm like, this is the one
okay.
Tom's going to get.
I see how it is.
No, you can give the one that I paid for and got. Anyway, some cool things in here. Some interesting things, and not that much different from original Pathfinder, so it's not like you're going to stray too far. But anyway, some cool stuff. We'll talk about that later. Yeah, I don't know. I picked up this nifty little dice tray for our mysterious GM who is rolling metal dice.
Somebody is rolling metal dice back here and putting pits in our very expensive gaming table.
So this is cool, and it will fit right behind their Starfinder screen. I don't know which GM it is.
It is not me. I roll all my dice in the pit and I roll them in the open.
As does Jordan Cage.
I have one of these from Campaign Coins that I'm going to bring in.
Nice. Excellent. Fantastic. Who could it be? We don't know. It's certainly not Tyler Rhodes who runs Starfinder. He claims it's not him. Anyway, so picked up one of these things. I picked up some dice from Roll for Initiative. This is no way a endorsement of these places, but that's
what you picked up.
Yeah.
But it sounds to me like it was more of a working con for you than it was a gaming con, right? Yeah.
For me personally, it was a working con. So I'm looking forward to some of the later conventions this year, which may be more of a play con, but it seems like they'll also be working cons too. So I don't know. Good things though. Good things. Certainly not bad.
I think DJ Regular brought up in the chat Big Bad Con because I mentioned Games on Demand, and I recommend Big Bad Con. It's in Oakland in October. I don't know whether I want to be there. I don't know whether I'll be there or not.
Yeah.
I'm sponsoring a room regardless. But it is a great con for indie role-playing games. If you want to play basically any kind of story game, that's the place to go. It's a small regional con, but it's well run, and it does have a teen-friendly element to it. And I recommend you go check out Big Bad Con. I'm sure you can still get a badge, and I had a great experience. The best thing about it, if you sign up for the events in advance, the scheduled events, like you can go play Games on Demand, which is what I did there. But if you sign up for the games in advance, they take over 2 floors of the hotel, and they empty all the beds out of all the rooms, and they put tables in instead.
Oh.
And so when you play, you show up to room 512. And it's you and the 6 other people who are playing that game, and you have your own bathroom for that room. You're the only ones in that room. There's plenty of chairs. There's plenty of room to kind of sit back, and you don't have to strain your voice to talk over everybody. It's really amazing. I
have to say we did. We had some great panels, and thank you to everyone who showed up. Maku, you were there. I saw you. We streaming RPGs. Awesome panel, great questions, lots of fun stuff. It was a little bit different. we did Women in Tabletop, which was an amazing panel, amazing guests. I hope that we can continue to do that each year. We were one of 2 panels actually for Women in Tabletop, and both I wasn't able to make the other one, but great panelists and great discussions. And then our live wildcards game, which was a lot of fun. I have to say, we did a special after the wildcards game. The crew, a lot of the crew went to Pinnacle was doing a special backer only Flash Gordon game for their Flash Gordon stuff. And
who do we know that's involved with the Flash Gordon game?
I mean, could it be anyone in our chat room? Probably not.
Probably not.
No, Savage Scott, who wrote the book on Flash Gordon, as it were. Literally. But we got to play in that game, and wow, talk about a little decadent experience. Thank you to Pinnacle for allowing us to play in that. But we just went into the basement of the Hilton, into this room that had 2 bathrooms in it, and were provided food and everything. We got to play with some backers and play some Flash Gordon, and it was like there could have been a nuclear bomb exploding above us, and we would never know. Just the elite, yes, thank you.
Yes.
Roll it
Bring me some more mutant pork.
Yeah, it was amazing. But do check out Flash Gordon. It is a really cool system, whether you know Flash Gordon or not, because I know that Jordan Pridgeon was like, I know nothing about Flash Gordon. I barely know the song, let alone the movie, let alone anything. And he had a great time, and so it's a cool little setting. So definitely check that out. But lots of cool little events and little things that we got to do. So
in terms of the wildcard stream, someone in chat mentioned that there are tech issues, which we are aware of. We're gonna try and follow up with the Gen Con peeps and get what was recorded, even though it was not broadcast, what was recorded up as a VOD. So keep that in mind, that we're gonna try to get that content back out on the Gen Con Twitch channel.
Yeah, hopefully. We were told that Wildcards, the whole thing would still be up, but would be put up at some point, but who knows. And yes, it was the 3rd floor, not the basement. It felt like the basement because it was absolutely windowless and dead quiet, but anyway, it was awesome.
I think the only other thing that I picked up from just sort of observing Gen Con from Twitter was how everybody who was jamming seemed to blow their voice. Like, I saw a number of different people who were like, "Oh, it's Friday morning and I can't talk." I'm like,
well,
that's not good. So, to drink lots of fluids and try to pull everybody in close. Sometimes that's not an appealing option. But do your best.
It was interesting though. Overall, it felt like a Gen Con that was moving forward. More streaming stuff. We won the Diana Jones Award.
Yes.
Which, no big deal.
You're welcome. I have to say though, like there was a little bit of snark around the internet about like, well, when actual play wins, like who actually wins.
Yeah.
And although, admittedly, Critical Role is like the titan of RPG streaming.
Yeah.
I think it would really be dismissive of a lot of other work going on. And I don't say that self-servingly. I say that as like a lot of the other work going on at other channels, a lot of streamers who have built up their own reputations and run their own games online and whatnot. Like, I think giving those people, whether you believe that we should be included in that game or not, I do like to think that we should be, but giving everyone recognition, I think, was the right thing to do, even if it ultimately feels like, well, who is actual play? Like it's a big thing. I think I do think it's changing the way the hobby is learned and the way the hobby is played.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to that particular trend, to this technology, which is a game changer in the industry, in my opinion. So recognizing that, I think, is worthwhile.
Yeah, and there was a good discussion. We had the Diana Jones Morning After report, which was actually the first stream out of Gen Con, which you should be able to watch the
VOD.
the past broadcast. It's the highlighted. They have not highlighted it yet. Hopefully they do, so that it stays up. But anyway, there was a good discussion. Matt Forsbeck, Satine Phoenix, myself, James Intriseco, and several other people were there to talk about the awards. And we had a little talk about actual plays and how they function in the industry and in the hobby right now, just from podcasts to Twitch streams to YouTube streams. There's a lot going on right now in actual play. And yeah, it's absolutely, I think, changing the industry. And Gen Con is reflecting that now. There's a lot of stuff that it's kind of updating, I guess, to the 21st century. So
yeah, I know they were making a concerted effort to try and bring that element of the hobby into the convention.
Yeah.
All right.
Real quick, Diana Jones Award, interesting story. So TSR UK went under long ago, and they torched everything.
So TSR UK went out of business.
Yes.
They closed that. TSR closed that branch, that office, and rather than ship all of the back product that they had left back to the U.S. and I don't know whether they could have or not. They destroyed it. They decided to instead destroy it, much like the ET, video game cartridges for the Atari.
Right.
But instead of burying them in a landfill in Nevada, they decided to burn a bunch of this stuff. And somewhere along the line, I don't know who it was, but somebody either came back with, or dug up, or found, or recovered a burnt piece of the Indiana Jones game that TSR put out. And all that was left was this little burnt chunk that said Diana Jones.
Yeah.
And so Matt Forbeck and a bunch of other D&D designers or industry people decided to create this award around it. And there's this...
It was a pub trivia award first.
Is that what it was first?
Yeah. Then it became this, but...
Yeah. So every year they kind of come up with 6 things or people or games that they think have made a significant contribution to the state of the industry. And it's a closed award system. They decide what it is. They decide who the nominees are. Shimmickson. Thanks for I've got my reroll pen ready here. I can just put Tom's good for 2.
Good seeing you this weekend, Shimmickson. Thank you for showing us some sites around Indy.
Yeah. So that's the that's the Diana Jones Award. It's basically 6 people who decide what they think is a big deal this year, and then pick one of those things.
Shimmickson gives you the reroll, by the way. It covers everything. It can be a person, it can be a game, it can be a system, it can be a
movement,
concept,
apparently,
movement. It's anything. So it's honestly, to me, it means a lot more because it's a broad category, and it really means who made an impact in gaming this year, right? It's not just who made the best thing. But
I think it's a thoughtful reflection of what these tastemakers, for whatever you think they are, believe is important in the hobby, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Right. It is not able to be brigaded. You can't use an IP spoofer to pad the results.
Right.
Whatever.
Right.
And not only that, but there's no nomination process.
Right.
They just decide who the nominees are.
They're going to be,
and then they decide who the winner is.
And there's no people's choice or anything.
Yeah.
You can't just go in and vote. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Anyway,
let's not go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. So that's Gen Con. That's half hour out of our block of time. So
we only did 24 minutes. Probably 23 minutes if you consider my cool song that lasted approximately 50 seconds. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the Dungeons and Dragons, about our game. Let's get back to some DMing advice. But I always like to I missed Gen Con, and
you were missed at Gen Con.
I appreciate everybody who said, "Where's Tom?" That's cool. And I wish I could be there. I went for several decades. I went to Gen Con, and then things got busy here in Los Angeles.
70 years.
I went for... That's right. Somewhere there's a Jeff Easley painting of me as a very old man that just keeps getting older and older. Yes. So, you're all beloved and you were all missed. But hopefully you can catch me at GameholeCon. I'm a guest at GameholeCon here in November, and Dom's gonna be there, and Andy's gonna be there, and Garab's gonna be there. So, come meet us in Madison in a much smaller, kind of more intimate venue.
The question was asked, will we be at PAX Unplugged this year? I don't know. I'd really like to go. It's a huge question of timing and money.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see.
The tough part about all of this stuff is that we can find ways to, if we need to, cut corners on putting a stream together or putting an impromptu. Like when we make our rent, we have a baseline of things that are, of expenses that are covered. But to do a trip like PAX, where you want to send 6 people, airfare, hotel, those are the bare minimums, right? Like, you'd like to feed them, you'd like to pay them a stipend, but, you know, by the time you put all of those things together, you're looking at $750 a head.
Yeah.
You know, that's $5,000 to fly someone to PAX fly through to PAX Unplugged before you even stream or record anything, right?
Right.
It's just to be there.
Right.
So,
And yes, event sign up for GameholeCon is this weekend.
Starts Saturday. Indeed. I have a few openings in my D&D game, but they're going fast. I will be doing a live Q&A. I will be doing a seminar called Random Encounters That Suck. So some of that advice will be familiar to longtime viewers of Disorganized Play, but we're going to talk DMing philosophy specifically around random encounters, but also in a broader sense. So tune in for that. I'll be doing a panel and a stream game with Saving Throw. So there's opportunities. Go to GameholeCon.com to look and see. You have to be a badge holder in order to sign up, but you can get a badge right now.
Yep.
You know, we'll take Blind Devotion's question right now.
Sure.
Right? Sure. Question for the GM's GM advisors. I feel like I should be wearing a suit and be carrying a clipboard. Hi, I'm your GM advisor. I'm new to D&D 5. I wanted to know what a GM should do if the monster encounter they designed is accidentally way above the CR that the party could handle. You know, I think that's a nuanced question in terms of... Oh, Modern Chow, thank you. Yes, thank you for the nice Photoshop as well.
Yeah.
I think some of that depends upon what you mean by way above. I have often pitted monsters that are quote-unquote way above, by which I mean like 4 CRs higher or more than the party. But if you put them in a one-on-one situation, the party generally can punch above their weight, in my experience, right? So if it's like 3 CR higher than what's recommended, you might not need to worry too much.
Right.
I will, if I'm using a monster, let's just say I find a monster that I think is cool, but is tougher than the party is. I will turn damage dice down. So if it says 2d8, I'll turn it to 2d6, you know, or 2d4, something like that. Almost always, every monster, regardless of what it is, I cut its hit points at least in half, sometimes in a third, right? A lot of things that we have been fighting in Iron Keep, it will say 60 hit points, I give them 20, you know, unless it's a boss monster, in which case I may give it the stated average, which is in the book, or push it up more towards the max end of things, right? If it's a big boss fight. But if it's just kind of a fight to like drain resources, have some engagement, let everybody use their abilities and whatnot, I will often cut the hit points of the monster by at least half, if not a third. And that's fine. If you want to be a little wild about it, you can kind of eyeball that in the game as you're going. You don't have to decide it's only got 20 hit points. You can say, all right, I'm going to say that this thing has between 20 and 50 hit points, and if they're doing really well against it, it has 50 hit points. If they're doing really poorly and it starts killing characters, it's only got 25 or 30, right? So that's for solo monsters. For big mobs, I think you're in trouble. If you have a bunch of creatures that you put together, I think it's I think it's dangerous to put a lot of creatures together because then a combat gets really complicated. There's a lot of moving parts, and one thing you don't really think about is what's the end condition of this combat, right? Mm-hmm. Generally, everybody just assumes, well, the end condition of this combat is one side is dead. That's perfectly acceptable for that to be the end condition of the combat, but I don't think that should be your only end condition of the combat, right? You should think about other things that might happen in the fight that might cause your bad guys to think twice about pressing their attack, or maybe there's something that they're trying to accomplish which has nothing to do with the party, and the party's just walking in the middle of something, and that thing could be over. They can flee, like different reasons that this combat might end, other than I've beat the thing to death with my +1 longsword. So multiple creatures is tough, especially because they can kind of like cut characters off from the rest of the group. You can have 4 guys pin down one NPC, isolate them, and then they're getting 4 or 8 attacks against that monster or against that that PC, and that PC can just all of a sudden go from 40 hit points to nothing, just wham in one round, right? So that's tricky with multiple monsters. I think when you add more than 2 monsters or 3 monsters into a fight, if they're of different levels and different powers, you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
If it's 6 skeletons, it's not as big of a deal to me. But I also try to make sure that those 6 skeletons are all a little bit kind of soft, right? Okay, can you kill them in 2 hits? Can you do 22 points of damage over 2 rounds? That's going to kill 1 guy, and then now we've got 5 skeletons. And if the whole party can do that, well, then the fight is generally going to be in their favor. So yeah, you can, as was suggested in the chat, the easiest way is to down the damage, reduce hit points. I would also say, maybe you don't re-roll, you don't roll those recharge abilities. It has lightning breath that recharges on a 4 through 6. It uses it once and never uses it again.
Yeah.
Also, you don't have to deploy if it has legendary resistances for saving throws, or it has lair actions. If you don't start with those, then you don't have to use them. Think about just kind of crossing those things off, right? Maybe it's not in its lair, or whatever. So think about those things. Those are some basic options that I would give you. It's easier to balance an encounter. Parties punch above their weight in a solo encounter. Consider other reasons the combat might end, or they might either offer a surrender or offer to surrender or invite a surrender.
Sure.
Just alternative ways for the combat to end. And then just don't... I often will Frankenstein a monster and go, I like these 3 parts of this monster. I don't like these other 3 things that this boss thing does. I'm just going to cross them out and ignore them.
Yeah.
So, the final thing I will say about this is monsters don't always fight in an optimized way, right? They can be insane, they can make foolish decisions, they can be overconfident. There's a number of different role-playing reasons why a monster might not do the smartest thing.
Yeah.
They knock a PC down. Okay, they could, if they're super smart, just kill that guy, right? We saw that a month ago on Critical Role, right? But Matt Mercer is very clearly trying to make a point of what a badass this dude is. But the bad guy could just be overconfident or feel like, oh, I'm in over my head. That guy's out of the picture. Good, I'm going to turn my attention to somebody else and not use... There's plenty of reasons that you can invent that are character-driven for the NPC, that come out of a motivation or an attitude that they don't feel, oh, that was easy to knock that guy down. I'm not threatened by you. Maybe he gloats and doesn't use his optimal attack or whatever. So if you spend a moment to think about what's this bad guy's bit, is he an arrogant bad guy? Is he a foolish villain? Is he greedy and opportunistic? So he's just driven by money, or he's driven to feed, or whatever it is. you'll have kind of an angle that you can use to get out of playing your bad guy to the ultimate kind of like optimization tactics and whatnot. Right. The other thing about that is, or a classic example of this is in Temple of Elemental Evil, Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil, a lot of the main villains were insane. And so GMs would come into the forums that I was moderating and say, well, why doesn't Hedrak just do X, Y, Z, da 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 da, you know, open with these 3 spells, and within 2 rounds, he's paralyzed half the party, and then he just goes through and crits everybody. And I'm like, well, the reason he doesn't do that is because he's batshit bonkers, right? He doesn't have to follow
not thinking logically.
Yeah, logical tactics because he doesn't think logically. So that's an easy way out. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about my game. Yes.
Speaking of high CRs.
Speaking of high CRs. So we're just going to do a quick recap because it's been a couple weeks since we played. Obviously, you can go back and watch the VOD, but I just wanted to kind of pick up the highlights of what happened on the last session of Keep Chronicles, so we're kind of up to speed in terms of what we're facing, right? So they brought Low Storm kind of back into the picture, right? Eric's character brought Lurg back to life. He spent a hero's moment to do that.
Yes.
Which I thought was great.
Yeah.
Right? Doesn't seem to be... At least he's not playing it like he's still in love with Lurg. That's okay. There was, notably, a mixed result, right, on that hero's moment, where something good happened, you kind of get what you want, but then something bad happens too. And so this weird blood shadow, like, comes to life out of Lurg's shadow and then slithers off and dissolves into the cobblestones and goes away, right? I thought that's notable to me because I want that to come back.
Right.
Right? So that was important. And then basically Shalfie, the Master's Apprentice, gave them the task of go talk to the druid in the valley, Durwith, find the star that fell, and that will lead you to the books of prophecy, right? And then obviously bring us the books of prophecy. That's really what it kind of comes down to. And so they went off and did that, and they sailed their boat up the river, and then came into an ambush between some Galabdurs and some quote-unquote bandits, right? And at the end of that fight, they found out that one of the bandits was a guy named Garen Vance, who is sort of a known, not necessarily nemesis to Eric's character, but Eric has a note on his character sheet that this fellow is renowned as a swordsman.
Right. And
so Eric wants to fight a duel against this guy to see who's the better swordsman. So that was one of the bits of like the character goals that got chummed out in there at the very end of the session. I think that's pretty concise. I don't know if anyone else has anything major to add, but I think those are the highlights.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
So, I'm not actually going to get very deep into where we're headed this next session because, importantly, knowing that we're going to have 2 sessions to kind of come to our hiatus, and then we're going to come back and finish off the rest of the adventure, knowing that we're not pushing to wrap this thing up in 2 sessions, I'm going to introduce some major elements of the B plot this session, and I don't want to discuss them here today because I want you all to take them in and enjoy them in real time.
Fresh face.
Yeah. Like this is stuff that's not in the module, so read the module if you want. I don't care. I'm going to be introducing some other stuff that's going on in the Ironwood that will hopefully be interesting, intriguing, and illuminating for you. The 3 I's of serving our chat audience. So we're not going to talk a lot about what's coming up in this session. I have ideas. I'm not going to talk about it. But I do want to talk about some higher level things that have come up. So what do we call our next one?
Overland Encounters versus Dungeon Design.
Yeah, Overland Encounters versus Dungeon Design. So here's something that occurred to me that I think applies and and was an insight that I developed, or that occurred to me today that I thought was worth sharing and exploring. So, we are essentially on... Are we really in a sandbox adventure? Kind of. Like, I gave them the opportunity, like, you can either go up this river and follow it the whole way, or you can try and go through this territory, da-da-da-da-da.
Right.
At this point, they've sort of diverged off of part of their game plan, right? Their game plan was to follow the river the whole way as much as they could. And now they've started to... They heard this combat happening, and these humans, you know, in distress, and they came to their aid. And now I think they're going to be faced with the opportunity to at least travel overland if they so desire, right? So we're not quite in a full-on sandbox. Go wherever you want, but we are in sort of a limited bound sandbox. We're definitely in overland travel mode. And I thought about this, and I'm like, what's the difference between designing a dungeon set of encounters and overland travel set of encounters? And why do people prefer putting a dungeon together versus putting together overland travel? And there's a number of different reasons for that. You know, a big one is when you walk into a dungeon, it by its nature limits the number of choices that you can make, right? Yeah. Like we can literally draw a square around it and go, they go in this room, and then they go in one of these two rooms, and then when they go in that room, they go in one of these two rooms, and those connect back to so I only have to describe 8 things, right? Whereas if you put a sandbox style game together, and you go, the map is everywhere, and you're faced with this design problem of, do I make everything interesting, or do I only make a few things interesting? And if so, how many is a few which is enough to make it feel like meaningful choices, or it doesn't bog things down too much?
Right.
So that's one reason you might find yourself falling into dungeon design, is it's an easier paradigm to create for, and that's fine. Like both of these things, I'm not trying to pick one over the other. Not my intent here. I'm just comparing what these two design templates or formats look like. But the thing that occurred to me is when I sit down and look at designing a wizard's tower versus designing travel through the forest, what I realized is with the wizard's tower, I end up creating locations, right? Okay, this is where he does all of his alchemy stuff, and here's a bunch of weird potion miscibility tables. If you mix the blue stuff with the bubbling red stuff, and with the blue fire, it turns into da-da-da-da-da, and there's an imp there, and, you know, like, I end up designing locations and features, and those are the things that I describe. When I sit down to look at creating encounters for overland travel, I very rarely describe locations. I may have a general idea of, okay, the forest is enshrouded in this silvery gloom, you can only see 60 feet, you can't see the sky above you, when it rains, it just rains out of nowhere. The trees are very, you know, have large trunks and rough bark, whatever, but none of that stuff is particularly interactive or interesting compared to when you mix these potions together, or there's a trap over here, and when they open this chest, they find da-da-da-da, right? Instead, though, what I end up finding myself creating is I create events. So rather than locations, I create events and situations. They come upon a group of bandits who are being massacred by 3 Gallop doers. And the party can choose to intercede on whoever's behalf, but this is sort of this is the dynamic situation that they encounter, as opposed to if you go into that Wizard's Tower dungeon, it doesn't matter if you go in on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 5 years from now, 500 years from now, it's described one way, and it's basically kind of static.
Yeah.
Unless you deliberately put something in there like, oh, so-and-so is, on guard between the hours of 8 p.m. and midnight, and then at 12:02 there's a guard changeover. Like, you can put that sort of detail in there. I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive. I'm saying in my design habits, I tend to design locations that have static, fixed, albeit interesting details. And when I design overland encounters, I tend to design situations. You'll see it in like Storm King's Thunder. Mm-hmm. They come upon a noble whose horse has broken its leg. The noble pleads for them for help or transportation and offers to pay them with a title or gives them a quest, right? But those situations, by their nature, cause you to think about, well, there's not necessarily a fixed resolution to this or a fixed approach to this, and it tends to open up a little bit more possibility in terms of what does the party want to do. The party could have stayed in the woods and just watched those guys get picked apart and then gone and talked to the Galabdurs, right? That could have happened. Mm-hmm. Conversely, I could have rolled some dice and decided, oh, okay, they managed to turn the tables on the Galabdurs and defeat them, and then they mourn their dead or whatever, and then they go back off into the woods. But they're intersecting an event that is not going to have necessarily a static outcome, or it's just a different way of thinking about, like, rather than worrying about what's the magical spell that causes this thing to do this in this dungeon, like, who would have cast this fire trap? Well, it must mean that there's at least a wizard of 7th level. Like, no. Instead, I'm faced with a dynamic situation. I go, okay, well, what's this one side want? Even if it's as simple as they want to defend themselves from the Galabdurs. What do these Galabdurs want? They want the men out of their forest. Great, okay. And then how's that, then I start turning over the possibilities. How's that going to play out? How could the party intervene? What are some things that could happen here? So the possibilities are more event driven and interactive than when I sit down to design a dungeon and it's interactive in terms of what dials and knobs can the party go, like what can they explore? What will a search check reveal, right? Sure. So this is a much more of kind of like if you want to very crudely divide it up, one is a much more of I make a search check kind of encounter design, and this may be much more of I make an insight check kind of design. What do we think is going on here?
Sure.
What are these people up to, rather than what do we think is going on here? How can we get the treasure or the information out of this room? So does that make sense?
Yeah. So in a way, the overland encounters are more. They're easier to fit in sort of random encounters, as it were, because there's by virtue of being outside, you have the entire world to be potential things that you can throw in there,
right? And
throw different types of difficulties at your players, because it requires different skills and stuff to sort of sort through them. Whereas the dungeon has a very strict kind of map, right? This is the room that the orcs stay in,
right?
And it's always going to be orcs staying in that room.
Generally, yes.
So unless the gnomes have burrowed through and crashed into that room or something,
Right.
But that's always static with a dungeon.
I also think, along those lines, the likelihood of encounter is dramatically higher in a dungeon,
right,
versus out in the woods, right? Like, let me just clarify that. So in a dungeon, very few parties like open a door and then close it and walk away, right? Unless there's no creatures in that room, or even then, like, especially at this table, our players are very much like they want to explore everything, right?
Yeah.
So if you put something in every room, there is a 95 to 98% chance that they're going to go and encounter everything in that room.
Mm-hmm.
Or when they encounter a room, they're going to explore it in some meaningful way. Let me put it that way, right? Regardless of whether they go in every room that they do go into, they embrace in a meaningful way.
Yep.
In overland encounters, they don't have to do that. It depends upon how it's presented.
Mm-hmm.
If you hear like, oh, the birds suddenly go silent, they might stop for a moment and hunker down and go into stealth mode and wait. And then if it turns out that the birds like start up again or whatever, like they may just like, let's just keep moving on.
Yeah.
Like they have less motivation to go and explore an encounter that's proposed to them,
Yeah.
as it were.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. In a dungeon, you don't need a hook for a room. The dungeon is the hook.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's a door here? We go through that. That's the hook, right? We're in a dungeon. There's stuff on the other side of this room. We're going to go in there. When you're out in an open-ended kind of overland encounter, if they hear goats braying in a weird way, there's a 50-50 chance that the party goes, do you know anything about goats? No.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a reason to go find out anything about goats? No. We keep going. You know? And that's fine.
Yeah.
But what I like to do, what it leads me to do as a DM is to create a more interesting hook so that encounter, if they do decide to go into it, has some juice to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And also, sometimes I will do stuff like play with like environment and sound effects and things like that.
Yeah.
In order to establish like the idea that you're being followed, or you know, to foreshadow that something else is going on, right? So this doesn't apply universally.
Sure. It's interesting because it sort of has that kind of video game mentality, right? Where when you're in a confined space and you see a wall,
yeah,
you want to go up to that wall and go old school gauntlet and just kind of go around and just kind of go around until you uncover everything, and then the exit opens up and then you get in.
Mm-hmm.
And you know your limitations because you walk in and the map is either laid out or
it's only going to be this big.
Yeah, so you're like, okay, I can go here. Whereas going overland, you may be on a trail and you have near infinite forest or whatever on either side. Right. You easily could go on. Sometimes I'll do that when I'm playing, and I'll be like, my character's a ranger. I can move through the forest. It's you know, it's not difficult terrain for me. I'm going to go off the beaten path, and I'm going to go through the forest instead of through the trail, because that's where they're going to be looking for me.
I'll be 80 feet away.
Yeah. But you have all that, but players will often just go like, well, like you said, you hear the bushes rustle off to the side. You know, it's like, okay, cool. You know, I'm just going to keep going.
We move twice as fast.
Yeah. We're just going to keep going.
Which is a reasonable way for them to react to, I might add. Simath Pirnikov points out, you know, they could just leave without searching every room in the castle.
Sure.
And then you've put a bunch of stuff in there that they never see. And that's not necessarily my point. My point is not that when you design a dungeon, a party will explore every room.
Right.
What I am saying is that whatever rooms they do explore, those rooms get explored
pretty thoroughly.
80% of the way there or whatever, right? Like they encounter whatever's in that room to the fullest of their. It's very rare that they abort or abandon a room that has something to offer them. Yeah. Whereas it's very common in an overland encounter to go, I'll ask him a few questions, then if it doesn't seem like he knows anything, we'll just take off. You know, good luck to you, buddy.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, where I'm finally going with this is the flip side of that, or the implications of that, means that I have to create something that's more engaging So I want them to walk into a situation. I don't want them to walk into a static thing of there's a guy sitting under a tree with the brim of his hat pulled down who seems to be taking a nap.
Yeah.
You know, oh, okay, well, we silently tiptoe past that guy and keep moving. Mm-hmm. Not that every party will do that, but I want the party to, I tend to think of what are the events that could happen along this journey. What things could be, I want to put some life into this world because they're out in the world. Whereas when I'm in a dungeon, I don't have to, you should, let me be very clear. I'm not saying this is the best thing to do one way or the other, but, and I'm definitely like a big fan of, okay, when they go into this room in the dungeon, somebody's being interrogated and they can rescue the guy or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. Where like a moment of drama is happening within that environment. So I'm a fan of doing both of these things and crossing them over. I just found myself like looking at, okay, here's the forest. What interesting things could be happening in the forest? Whereas when I sit down to design a location, I go, what interesting features are there or creatures are there that exist within?
Yeah.
Now that's totally different than, it's just a totally different, one is a lot more dynamic and one is much more static. Mm-hmm. I definitely encourage you to try and make dynamic things happen or offer the possibility of them within your static location, right? But for me personally, I realized there's two different mindsets at work here. When I sit down to draw a map, it's one thing, and when I sit down to think about, okay, we're going to be traveling from A to B, my approach, the way I get inspired or I tend to think about these things is much more skewed toward we're going to walk into something happening.
Yeah. Hey, MSC, welcome. You had an interesting point, and then we can move on to the next bit. But you had an interesting point about how dungeons are going to be more. You're going to have more people, potential encounters in a dungeon than you will out in the forest or whatever. And I thought that was interesting, just from a story standpoint. It makes sense, right? Because a dungeon is probably going to be patrolled. It's a confined space that whoever owns or operates that dungeon is going to have people monitoring and moving through and things of that nature. Whereas a forest, like you might have a group of druids that have, that are circling it or maybe monitoring the borders or something. But once you're inside, I mean, even random encounters with animals and stuff like that, it's gonna be few and far between.
Right.
Like if you go camping, you're not every time going to see, okay, there's a family of black bears, there's this, there's that, the other thing. They're rare. A lot of those things, and that's why monster manuals and stuff will say it's uncommon. It's rare. It's very rare.
I feel like if you want to play with a high level of verisimilitude and really make it seem realistic, sure, you could have a bunch of encounters with like raccoons and deer and a bear and da da da. But I don't think that makes for interesting play.
No,
right.
No.
Unless that's something that unless you decide to like, you're trying to make a point on something like there's an evacuation going on in the forest and therefore they they encounter a few travelers, then they encounter a whole family, then they encounter this part of a town coming through or whatever. We have a couple different questions
Dubba
in the
first. I've had difficulty adjudicating short rests while my party is in a dungeon. Should I allow it, or should I make a good table for it if they get their rest or not? I mean, yeah, I think if they've cleared out a room or whatever, they can have a short rest. But like we were just talking about, there's nothing that's preventing your dungeon people to be monitoring and saying, hey, we haven't heard from so-and-so in room whatever, we can go check it out. But,
I mean, this is something I struggle with myself, right, is they're in the middle of a dungeon, they're like, well, we met camp for an hour.
Yeah,
okay. Right. like, all right, you there was just this large, like you literally like fired off a fireball 2 rooms away. There's an enormous explosion. There was a lot of screaming and smashing of weapons on metal shields and stuff. You know, I would say you're well within your right as a GM to think about or consider making a table if that provides you with some structure for, okay, this area is now on high alert, it's on medium alert, it's on low alert. If it's on no alert for whatever reason, you know, maybe everything is undead and it is just sort of like lives in its own little world and doesn't really care what happens in the room next door, then fine, let them have the short rest, whatever. You know, the only real issue with letting them have short rests is it brings them fresh into the next fight. You can make that next fight a little bit tougher. You control that, right? So whether or not they get short rests is not, honestly, an enormous issue. I do think if you feel like it destroys it breaks the suspension of disbelief, it just seems unreasonable that they would be able to camp in the middle of this, you know, orcish, you know, army encampment or whatever. Yeah. Then no, like then I would say to them, okay, well, let's all make, you know, either wisdom checks or intelligence checks or whatever, and say, well, you realize you just had a really big fight and you noticed a lot of footprints in this area. It seems like it's heavily patrolled. What do you want to do? Right? Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So I think it's not unreasonable to set the scene for them when they want to do a short rest. And that's just good DMing anyhow, right? It's like, okay, well, you find this area, you're considering taking a short rest. You find this area that seems like it's somewhat advantageous to take a short rest in. However, you notice the following things about it. There's, you know, whatever. It can be, you know, burnt out pipe tobacco in one corner that leaves, you know, there's a bunch of ashes. Clearly somebody comes here to smoke on a regular basis or whatever. It could be, this is the place where it's the latrine, you know, whatever it is, or just a path of footprints, etc. Or the absence of those things. Yeah. So I think it's fair to give the players kind of an idea of whether they think it's safe to take a short rest there or not, you know, what their character's estimation of that is. But I think it's also fair to have a table that's like, this is a high traffic area, this is a medium traffic area, this is a low traffic area. Yeah. And then do a roll. You don't have to roll for each person who's on watch, or you can just roll once, whatever it is, and put your best odds on it. You know, if it's a high traffic area that has somebody coming through once an hour, then maybe say, okay, on a well, I guess they do it on a D20 now, don't they? So it's like, okay, well, on a 1 through 18, somebody comes through. And if it's a medium traffic area, that turns into a 1 through 12. And if it's a low traffic area, then it's a 1 through 6. Or whatever you decide your scale is. I don't care. But I would say, set the scene for them. Give them an indication of whether it's a highly trafficked area, medium trafficked area, low trafficked area. And then roll. You know, let them respond to that and decide whether they want to follow through on their short rest, and then roll. But that way, it's not just sort of this capricious, like, well, I'm checking things. You've decided to take a short rest. I'm going to check. Nope, you don't get it. Right. You know. So that's fair to the players. I think whenever you have rests and watches, I think it's important to set some expectations for the players in terms of what their characters think about where they're camping. Because I think you should always assume some competence on the part of the characters, even if the players aren't necessarily demonstrating it, right? The players are like, we'll set up camp, it'll be fine. If they're not paying attention to it, but you know that their characters would be smarter than that, give them the opportunity to act on information. Yeah. You're right by the creek and you notice that there's a game trail that's about, 10, 15 yards away. Okay, and then let them do whatever they want with that information. Oh, perfect, let's go hunting. Great, fine. You're not taking a short rest, you're going hunting? Terrific, now we have something else to do.
Right.
Or, yeah, we're gonna set up an ambush here. Fine, perfect. But you've given them information that talks about whether they think whether they need to find a new place to rest or it's wise to rest here. And what they then do with that is then up to them. And sometimes the dice just screw you.
Yeah.
So that's fine.
Along those lines, MSC was talking, and if they understood this right, that upon listening to DM's Deep Dive episode 6, I think that was with Jennifer.
I think DM's Deep Dive, he's referring to the podcast with Mike Shea, right?
Oh, there you go.
The stream.
That's
We did
the
a
one,
stream
yeah.
with Mike Shea.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Sly Flourish.
There we go. Yeah, you talked about how you don't like rolled random encounters because you as a GM are more invested in the encounter if you prepared it a bit and have more background and thoughts about it. And yeah.
So I don't want to get super deep into this. You can certainly go back to, if you search at Dungeon Bastard and search for random encounters suck, you will find some things on Twitter that I've posted about this, but also I've done, you should find a link to a YouTube video that I've done about this. Also, this is the main topic for my my seminar talk at Gamehole Con. So I'm not going to cover all of this ground in depth here today. But yeah, my feeling is, like we were just talking about with this overland versus dungeon thing, right? When you create random encounters, you're essentially creating a lot of these kind of dynamic situations, right? And you start to get invested in, like, oh, this is a cool encounter, and then you start fudging the system where it's like, well, I want them to encounter this anyhow, right? And that goes against the stated intent of random encounters. The idea of random encounters is that they are random and also somewhat optional, right? If they were mandatory to the plot, they would be part of the plot. They would not be random encounters. Random encounters are potentially optional side quests, or it's a bit of flavor or foreshadowing or what have you. Sometimes it's just a completely random other thing that happens to be happening in this location. I'm not a big fan of that style of encounter because oftentimes players will hit that, hook into it, and go whoop, and all of a sudden whatever your plot was is now going in a perpendicular direction. You know. But yeah, when you write up those things and you give them a lot of detail, you get really invested in them and they cross over from being random encounters to being... It's very easy to create things like that become kind of plot deflectors, right? Oh, I've come up with this really cool idea. It doesn't have anything to do with my main plot, but I really like the idea that there's this monk and he's sitting there and he's knitting something, and it turns out that he's knitting this code, but this code is actually like a language, and it turns out that it's a prayer, but it's really powerful. He's actually completing a ritual, and when the ritual is going to, when that is complete, it's going to restructure the entire nature of the forest, or whatever it is. All of a sudden, you're off on a tangent that has nothing to do with what the players are pursuing. And those are fine moments of inspiration, but I'm much more of a fan of we start a journey that has an inciting incident, and then we follow an arc of drama and action until it lands and resolves, than I am you pinball around and explore whatever you want, and there is no build-up of drama or suspense, and in fact, there's a ton of things that are kind of discarded along the way that never get resolved, that the players go, well, what about, whatever happened with that monk guy who was like doing the thing, you know? Now, if you're really clever, you can like knit those, you can bring that web of connections back together into a resolution. And I'm not saying you should railroad the players into this journey by any stretch of the imagination, but what I am saying is when you engage in this exercise of creating random encounters that are very detailed, there's the way that your plot is going, and they hit one of these things, and your plot goes in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
So I'm not, in terms of, there's a big debate to be had of what is the purpose of a random encounter, right? But I'm not a big fan of creating a bunch of stuff that is intentionally detached from your plot that throws your party off the rails. I think your players can really only keep track of 2 or 3 things at a time in terms of story threads and plot elements. And if you start introducing things, then things start falling off kind of the back of the cognitive load, right? And so that's the problem, is that you introduce the newest, shiniest thing and they go, let's chase that.
Yeah.
And the real issue there, apart from like the conditions that we have here on the stream, which is we want to ask people to be engaged with a game, and I'm talking about our players, right? So our players are performers. We don't want to ask them to be engaged in an open-ended campaign, and we say, well, we want this to go for 8 weeks or maybe 10 weeks, and if you want it, we're going to take a break, and if you want to come back and join us for another 8 weeks, you can re-up. So we have to kind of keep the story consolidated in some way, shape, or form, at least over the course of 6 months, right? But I'm trying to think where I was going with that. The problem that you have with it in your home game is because you're never building towards a conclusion or resolving the main problem, the main conflict in your campaign also feels wanderless and meandering. And if your players don't have a sense of focus, purpose, and drive, then at some point when they get tired of playing their 12th level necromancer, they go, yeah, why don't we just play Scythe this weekend? Right. Or why don't we just, and I don't think I can make it or whatever. They start to lose interest in motivation. So I'm not saying railroad them into a plot, but I am saying if you want to create that stuff, make sure that you create it so that it's still somehow tied into whatever your main plot story is, or at least puts them onto a parallel path that will then rejoin the main plot in some way, shape, or form, and gives them an on-ramp or an off-ramp, right? Right. So, all right. The last thing that I want to talk about today is I called this on Twitter. I called this 5-color encounters, right? But we called it, what did we call it?
Moral depth.
Moral depth. All right. What's the deal here?
Yeah.
What's the deal, Dom? Dom, what was I thinking when I put this on the topics for today?
Wow, you had.
I was sitting there eating my Big Mac.
You were talking about NPCs and sort of motivations.
I know what I was thinking. I'm just putting you on the hook. It's fine. So here's
he jokes, but I really had to jog his memory. Right
no, you did not. I was trying to do a bit. It's not fair.
Didn't work.
No, it did not work. So at the end of last session, they encountered these Galabdur who were fighting essentially like what appeared to be bandits, right? These guys are dressed in black leather armor, black chainmail. They seem to be road-worn, weary, tough travelers of the woods, right? And at the table, there was definitely like, we're going to help these guys, but I don't trust any of them. These guys seem like assholes.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to just talk for a few minutes about where we go, what potential is offered here by this situation. Because you will note that there wasn't really a predefined, like, good guy, bad guy dynamic in the way that encounter was set up, right? There's these monstrous rock creatures who are beating these humanoids, and the humanoids seem kind of dodgy. And it was interesting to me that like they just decided to take the side of their fellow humanoids. I mean, admittedly, the humanoids were like, "Help! Ah, I'm being crushed."
Yeah.
You know, so there wasn't an appeal to their better instincts. And to me, that's what made this encounter complicated, like morally complicated, right? Or it had some depth and nuance to it that you might not see in a similar scenario. Like if you take the exact same scenario and you put different combatants in it, and it's a bunch of elven druids who are being slain by, I don't know, like warlock trolls, it's very clear that there's a good side and a bad side, and we should intercede on their behalf, and we'll talk to them, and we'll help them, da 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 da, right? So that's fair. But instead, we have this more, to me, what I think is more interesting, morally complicated situation of these guys might not be good guys who are up to no good, and yet we feel some allegiance to them because they're in a precarious position, right? They're calling for help, right? Now, I think I might have pointed this out on Twitter a few weeks ago or whatever, but to me, what you can do, sometimes you want those black and white situations. We will kill the warlock trolls. Mm-hmm. And that's fun and straightforward, and we will overcome that challenge, and we are now heroes, and that's great. So I'm not necessarily arguing for everything has to be different shades of gray, and everybody's complicated, and and who can trust whom, and all of their methods and motivations shall be revealed. Da, 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 da. Like, if you want to play that kind of game, sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes your players just want to beat on mindless ghouls, ghasts, and zombies. Mm-hmm. They want to kill the vampire, right? Sometimes it turns out that the vampire got turned into a vampire not of his own willingness or volition, and he would like to be cured of his vampirism, and therefore he does not kill the party because he wants them to somehow save him, and yet he has to fight his own nature, right? How do you turn that gauge from black and white or four-color comics, the guys with the capes versus the guys with the iron masks, into kind of a more complicated thing? And my advice on this is that you create characters that have vulnerability to them, right? So we had these apparently like badass bandit guys. They were getting murdered. Like, they were not competent. They were not in a position of strength. They were in a position of weakness and were inviting rescue. And some of it, in terms of what was on offer there, was, okay, we saved you, now you're going to owe us, right? Like, that's kind of a dynamic that's been introduced there, right? So that, I think, like, having some sort of vulnerability creates NPCs that have a life that's relatable, right? Because everybody can relate to this person is having problems, they're having a struggle, whatever that might be. Sure, not all of us can relate to, oh, I've been cursed by a vampire lord and my hand is withered and I have these weird, fangs for fingernails and I can only feed through, stabbing people in the neck or whatever with my hand. But we all certainly can relate to, oh, this person has an addiction that is uncontrollable, that they feel, that they don't like about themselves, that they want to try and conquer, but they can't do it on their own, right? So to me, when you want to introduce a degree of realism and or relatability or nuance to a character, one of the most powerful ways to do it is to give them, now I don't want to say give them a vulnerability, because that implies a mechanical thing of like, oh, they take extra damage from sunlight or whatever. But instead, a moment of vulnerability where they can show that they are weak and they need help.
Yeah.
And I think, we're going to see that sort of play out with these bandits in terms of, like, we've already seen that to some degree play out. But, the party, I think, has this expectation of, oh, it's going to turn out these guys are total assholes, and so we should be prepared to turn on them at any moment. I don't want the forest to be as straightforward as the forest is good and everyone is, and these guys are bad. I think it can be a little more complicated than that. You have to be careful with this approach because players don't like to find themselves in the position of being the accidental villains.
Right.
And they can feel entrapped by the circumstances that the GM has created. And they can also feel like they don't have the tools to change whatever those circumstances are, and now they're just being toyed around with, where they set out to be heroes, and the GM, by virtue of the way the encounters have been sort of set up for them, has turned them into unwitting assholes.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's very dangerous. I think, like something comparable would be sort of like global warming, right? I don't feel like myself personally, there's a lot I can do about global warming, but now what? Now I'm frustrated, And you don't want to put your characters in that position of, to be kind of like blithe about it, like of moral warming, right?
Right.
All of a sudden they find out, Dungeons and Dragons is a game where you murder people and take their stuff. And you are essentially, like, morally jerks. But it's also a game about being heroes. So you have to be careful about, like, working too hard against the premise of the game, which is you're able to solve your problems heroically using violence. Like, if that's not a premise you're down with, then play a different game, or tell everybody up front, we're playing a very different version of Dungeons and Dragons, because D&D, in default mode, is violence will save you.
Right. Right.
So, yeah. So that's my advice on. I think those, Here's where I want to point out that this has been successful for me before, right? Which is we had this character named Ginji, who was very clearly this evil guy who entered into this lawful evil pact with the party, and then they found out, like, later that he was under the thumb of Xanathar, the crime lord, and he hadn't actually really done them immense amounts of, like, direct damage, and he became more of a sympathetic character, right? So if you, I feel like that situation started to become interesting, because now we're developing a relationship with that NPC, and they become a lot more complicated and interesting than we want revenge, we kill him, and that's the end of that plot line.
Right.
Right? I'm not saying that every plot line has to bloom into this fascinating, complicated web of relationships and motivations, but I think there's room for that somewhere within your campaign. And right now, I think there's an opportunity for that with these bandits. So, Siameth Punikov says, I accidentally awakened a Kraken. Our party is level 4. Should I be worried? No, because either one, your GM is really smart and will find a way for you to relate to or interact with this Kraken, despite the fact you're level 4. Or, and this is more likely, your party will soon be dead and you get to make new characters. So, there you go. Done. All right, that's all of our advice for the day. We had some great questions, great conversation. So thank you so much for everybody who pitched in or had a question or made an observation. It's always welcome. That's what the show is about, not just me gabbing as much as possible.
Not just
me gabbing as much as possible, but mostly me gabbing as much as possible. But I appreciate you coming to the table and participating. That's what it's all about. What have we got Do we got anything tonight?
Nothing tonight?
Nothing tonight. We're still in Gen Con recovery mode.
Yeah. So
you can see how some of this advice plays out tomorrow night. It is our penultimate session of the Ironkeep Chronicles before we take a little mid-season break. So we've got 2 sessions left here. We'll see what happens with the bandits, and they are also in Minotaur territory. I believe that was established. They got some cool maps and whatnot.
So you're saying that some bowmen might be coming for the party? I mean that. At this table, that's never been a bad thing.
Yeah, that's never worked out into anybody's disfavor. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't see how that could be bad. So you can tune in tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Pacific for the Ironkeep Chronicles. Kyle, Amy, Havana, and Eric will be here. I don't want to overpromise things, but it sounds like everybody is coming back after the hiatus. I do have to kind of confirm that one final time with everybody, but it sounds like everybody's going to come back after the hiatus for the second half of this arc. So I'm pretty excited and gratified to have this party back at the table, because I feel like they're still exploring their characters, their relationships, and I really want to see them kind of like coalesce together and grow and turn into something where they go, okay, that's like cool, I get who this character is, I've accomplished something.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thursday, of course, we're dark. What's going on Friday night? Anything?
Friday. Friday we are doing Prickly Tall Stag and the Danger Seekers Comma Pairs, our Savage Worlds fantasy.
It sounds like a fantasy, that's for sure.
This is episode 3 of that, which we now do after every season of Wildcard.
It's a little palate cleanser after each TPK. It's a palate cleanser.
And I will be doing a goofy accent on that one. I'd have a goofy German accent that I do.
Oh.
It's a little...
Do you carry a lanthorn?
No, I don't carry lanthorn.
I'm going to talk to Jordan, make sure that you get one.
Yeah. Well, see, I don't go crazy like you do. But did I update? No, I didn't. Farquaad. There's some changes to the calendar image that aren't in there, but I will tell you now. So Saturday we have. So that's Friday. Saturday we have our Call of Cthulhu game with Mark from Campaign Coins and special guests including Tom and Amy. And then Sunday we have at 1 o'clock Pacific time, we have Dungeon in a Box. Yes. So David's going to be running... America's GM will be running episode 2, basically, of the monthly series of Dungeon in a Box, where he'll be running through the next set in that campaign. And then at 5 o'clock, Tempting Fate returns, starting off a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy setting, so in Lasers and Feelings.
Is there going to be like a massive fight over who gets to play Marvin the Paranoid Android? That's the only character I want to play. I don't want to play anybody else from the Hitchhiker's Guide. Not that, there's not other cool characters to play, but Marvin is very clearly the most fun.
Right. Yeah. I guess.
I guess. But as much as one can have fun in an uncaring universe.
You don't care anyway. Yes, this is Carolina Game Tables.
Welcome to it.
Yeah, Clint actually from Carolina Game Tables will be coming at some point later this year.
Did it come with these little divots?
Oh no, those were given to us by a special GM who shall remain nameless, Tyler. And anyway, Clint's coming apparently. We have not messed ours up as much as the Geek and Sundry crew has messed up theirs.
Shocker.
But he's going to come and maybe help us out, fix a little bit of these things. So, yeah, we'll see about that. Anyway.
So there's a lot of stuff coming up the rest of the week. So just to recap briefly, tomorrow night, Ironkeep Chronicles. Yes. Friday night,
Prickly Tall Stag and the Danger Seekers, Pairs.
Masturbatory Wildcards, weird off one shot, fine. All right, and then Saturday night, you can join me and Amy and Mark Morrison for Call of Cthulhu. Sunday afternoon is
Dungeon in a Box.
And Sunday night is Tempting Fate. So that's the way we're going to roll out the rest of the week here. Kind of a gradual roll up out of Gen Con and kind of recover get our bearings, get our feet back underneath us.
Yes.
So I think we'll have some great stuff for you tomorrow night. Please do tune into Iron Keep Chronicles tomorrow. I think it's going to be a fun session. Some interesting stuff going on. And I can't wait for you to see what that is. That's why I kind of kept it under my Iron Man hat, as it were.
So that's why you've been wearing the hat.
That's right. This is all my B story is underneath my Iron Man hat.
Oh, that makes sense.
What happens is there is a billionaire genius weapons developer who gets captured by the Galabdur and the Minotaurs in the forest, and he is being tortured by them. And at some point, one of his own arrows goes into his heart.
Okay.
And the party will have to do heart surgery on him to keep him from being killed by that, and then they help him assemble a giant steam golem to escape the Minotaur prison camp.
And someone will go, he built this in a cave! Okay, cool.
Cool. Very good. Hey, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you tomorrow night here on the Iron Keep Chronicles. Until then, let's dungeon!
See, Tom?
No, you were a lot quicker on the draw before Gen Con. What happened?